Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our briefing, which is sponsored by Consumers Credit Union. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications, and we're glad you joined us today. A little bit about Consumers Credit Union. They have a new blog that you can check out on their website, which is consumerscu.org, and they are opening up branches across Lower Michigan. So check them out and see if there's one in your area. So Brian, you're joining us from the car today, which is a little bit of a flashback to 2020 when you consistently hosted the briefing from your car. So where are you coming from today?
Yeah, I'm actually in Southeast Michigan. A lot of traffic. First of all, construction getting back. I'd hoped to be in stationary position, although I am parked. I was in Southeast Michigan today because I had an opportunity to get a tour of the new bridge connecting Canada, Windsor, Ontario, with Detroit, Michigan, and it's called the Gordie Howe International Crossing. I don't know if people have seen or tracked this the progress of the construction of this bridge. It will be the largest bridge of its kind. It's a type of suspension bridge, largest bridge of its kind in North America, and it's a really important trade crossing. Now, back in the day, back when I used to be lieutenant governor, and when SBAM was an organization I loved to work with on issues, SBAM did support the construction of a new crossing from Michigan to Canada. And the reason for that is because Canada is Michigan's most important international trade partner. And it's also, for much of the last generation, has been America's most important or biggest trading partner. For a while, that became China. And until just recently, as China has faltered somewhat, the Canada has regained its position as the number one trade partner with America. We have a lot of cross-border and integrated supply chain work in business that happens, and so the idea of having some redundancy of the busiest commercial trade crossing in North America makes a lot of sense. Very impressive structure. I had an opportunity to see it up front, learn about the runway in front of it here too. It's supposed to be completed by the end of next year, so December of 2025 or 2024. I'm sorry. Now, wouldn't surprise me if it went into 2025 a little bit, because construction projects of that magnitude and the fact that some of the construction happened during COVID and closures and so forth and supply chain issues, wouldn't surprise me if it was a bit delayed because of that. But really, they are working hard at it. The towers are up, almost complete. The bridge span, you can see that's kind of inching it across the river from Canada into Detroit, and so they're getting closer and closer. It's a very impressive structure. The height is what really surprised me. I've seen renderings of this. I worked on this project personally when I was in public office, and so I'm familiar with all the stats. But to really see it, each of these towers that suspend the cables are about as tall as the Renaissance Center in the city of Detroit. So think of the tallest building in Detroit, a big building, kind of circular building, and has different parts to it. You see it in all the skyline pictures. The towers that the suspensions cables are attached to, they're about that tall, just a little bit shorter than the Renaissance Center. So it's a massive crossing, and it looks like it's coming along. So had an opportunity to look at it, and just traffic. I didn't get back to the office in time, so we're going old school from the car today.
Well, that sounds like a really cool opportunity to go in and see how the progress is being made. Let's kind of stick to the international news for another minute or so. You've shared insight in previous shows about the Chinese economy, and now there are some new reports out from China that point to continued struggles. So what's the latest there?
Yeah, we talked about the GDP there slowing down and the kind of the impact on the global economy. And what happens there is going to have some impact on the U.S. But we also see a lot of reshoring that's happening in American manufacturing, in particular of operations, which is clearly having an impact on the Chinese economy. But there's other things too. The real estate market is faltering. The GDP growth is still positive, but a lot slower than what they need. They don't have the type of social safety net in China that we in Western cultures are very accustomed to, and so it really is causing the consumers there to be more reserved in kind of getting ready or buckling down for some tough economic times. But the report that just came out that I thought was quite telling was from the Chinese government itself, which is not always transparent when it comes to their economic health. And in this case, what that showed was that their exports, China lives off exports. Their exports were down 8.8% in August compared to a year earlier. And their imports are actually down just under 8% as well. So they're buying less, they're making and shipping less around the globe. And that's a trend that will probably continue into the future as more and more gets onshored. They're brought back to North America and to the US. And it's one of the reasons why that trade crossing from Detroit to Windsor will be even more important in the future, because there is an integrated supply chain that goes across North America from Mexico to Canada, with the US being the heart of that for major industries. And so I just think that this bridge, at a time when that trend is happening, that we see playing out in China today, it's going to play an increasingly important part to our economy. And by the way, we think of trade and the value of the goods going back and forth. A lot of it is automotive, and those are big companies. But most companies that trade, not by volume of trade, but just the number of companies that trade, most of them are actually small business doing business over the borders back and forth in between Canada and Michigan. So we have a pretty big stake in that, and so just really a thrill to see that project continue.
All right, let's move on to a couple of federal issues. The first is that the Department of Labor has proposed new overtime rules. So tell us more.
Yeah, this is really a pretty big concern, what has been proposed. It's a big change. There would be about 3.6 million workers across the country that would be affected by this, but essentially it's applying a new threshold for who automatically qualifies for overtime. So if you think about your overtime rules, who gets it and who doesn't, we think of like salaried professionals, but it's not a matter of whether or not you pay somebody a salary. It's the job duties and the salary basis that determines whether or not somebody is eligible for overtime. But there's a threshold that's just over $35,000 in today's regulations, that if you have a salary of $35,000 or less, you automatically get overtime, even if the job duties are management in nature. Well, the proposal is to move that salary threshold to $55,000. So this would say anybody making $55,000 or less would automatically get overtime. So people that today are not really used to keeping track of their hours would have to. And the reason I think this is particularly problematic, and why when they open up the comments, we'll do a call to action so our members can speak into the process with the U.S. Department of Labor. The reason this is such a big problem is that there are so many workers that are remote these days, and so like the idea of keeping track of hours, and there's maximum flexibility. Employers with a rule like this, if you are 55,000 in salary or less, a lot of employers are going to be in a position where they have to be more rigid about the schedule to keep track of when a person is working, because there are big penalties for violating overtime rules. And this would put millions more people under the automatic overtime threshold, and the salaries that would be under the automatic overtime threshold, which means that they'd have to keep track of their hours more, and employers very likely would have to be more rigid and less flexible about scheduling in order to comply with these rules.
All right, and we'll certainly keep everyone updated and have some content related to this issue in our newsletter next week. Brian, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation recently released a study that basically puts a price tag on the lack of childcare. So tell us a little bit about this study and what it might mean for Michigan.
Yeah, the U.S. Chamber Foundation, they do economic reports and studies, and they really zeroed in on childcare, the lack of childcare, and what that means for businesses and to our economy. And it has a multi-billion-dollar impact here in Michigan, over $2 billion in impact, because they're just the availability of affordable, high-quality childcare. And that plays out in the workforce. And now it's not the only workforce issue, but it is one of the pieces to the puzzle. It's one of the reasons why you see so much more focus on childcare from business groups, including SBAM. In fact, SBAM has been a real leader on both the supply and the demand side of the childcare system, the way that the regulations work, the way that the reimbursement works, and even some innovative partnerships to try to do new things to result in more access to childcare, and to see that if you just zero in on Michigan, the U.S. Chamber study, but a multi-billion-dollar impact here from people just not being in the workforce. I think it was about 2.8 or 2.3. I'm not recalling it the exact number, but it would have over $500 million of impact when it comes to tax revenue to the government. So, like if that many more people were in the workforce, then of course it would have a huge impact. So when the folks in the government world are looking at the child care programs and are they too expensive and that sort of thing, there's a lot of reason to err on the side of having more child care available and doing whatever you have to do to make the business model around providing child care, people getting access to child care so they can be in the workforce. It makes sense to go the extra mile to do whatever has to be done.
All right, now we're going to talk about some issues right here in Michigan. The first is about Governor Whitmer's speech from last week. They labeled it as kind of what's next. SBAM was tuned into her address, and of all the issues that she outlined, Brian, what do you need our members to know?
Yeah, the governor talked about a lot of different issues, and it's a little unusual, like to give an end of the summer speech, but it really appeared to be trying to set the agenda for what happens this fall. And we do expect, starting this week through the beginning of November, there to be a pretty fast pace of legislative activity. And I think the governor's trying to get the legislature to focus in on a couple key areas. Some of those aren't business issues, so I won't cover the things that are non-business issues. But the business issues, I think everybody needs to be aware of that are concerning in the speech is the idea of adding a family medical leave benefit that is mandated on all employers that would assess a new payroll tax in order to fund something that's kind of like the unemployment trust fund, where then employees could draw from if they qualified for one of these types of leave. And what's been said is that while they haven't put out the details of the proposal, they've said, hey, this is like what we're talking about is something like Minnesota has done. Well, Minnesota's family medical leave benefit mandated on every employer in the state, including all small businesses. So anybody who has one employee or more, at least as it's been introduced so far in the Senate, would have to pay into the system. It'd be a new assessment on employers, potentially on employees as well, to fund up to 15 weeks of paid leave per year. And so this is the details will matter a lot on this, but we're really concerned about any kind of one-size-fits-all mandate that gets put across employers, and also very concerned about the idea of modeling a new system after the unemployment system, which really hasn't worked all that well. So that's this is something that's really moved up high. It was already on the list of pieces of legislation that we were concerned about. If you were to look at SBAM's problematic legislation running list that we have out there for our members to keep track of, or that we're keeping track of and keeping our members informed of, this has really moved up in our list of concerns because it's been made a priority of the governor. The other thing was energy and energy policy. We've seen this talked about quite a bit. We've seen in the House and in the Senate energy packages that seek to move Michigan more toward renewable energy sources. And the utilities are already moving toward renewable energy sources, wind and solar in particular. So this is really about going all the way. So 100% renewable, 100% carbon free. There's a difference between carbon free and carbon neutral. Carbon neutral is a standard that generally in the past, environmentalists have pointed to and encouraged and supported the idea of being carbon neutral. It's like offsets to carbon production. So you get rid of coal, you reduce your overall carbon footprint, and then you either do sequestration or plant more trees. There's different things that you do in order to offset carbon footprint. What's being proposed and talked about now in the system is going to 100% carbon free. That means that you go to wind and solar, and some of the proposals are saying, yeah, maybe nuclear as well because there's no emissions. But by going to that to 100%, we're really concerned about reliability and affordability of the system in the future. For our standpoint, the way that SBAM's policy on energy works is that we don't opine on whether or not make energy in this way or that way. That's not our issue. Our issue is that it needs to be reliable and affordable. So if they can do that with wind and solar, great. But you've got to show how you're going to keep it reliable and affordable, and not expect small businesses to really carry an additional burden in the future of higher costs because they wanted to go from 90% renewable to 100% renewable. So these are the things that we're working on and through that we expect to be really high in the priority list of the legislature, because they've been made a priority by the governor in the speech last week that was kind of dubbed the "What's Next" speech.
All right. And just a reminder, if you are not signed up to receive SBAM's Lansing Watchdog email, it's a short newsletter that goes out each Tuesday. Email us, sbam@sbam.org, and we'll make sure that you're added to that distribution list so that you can keep up to date on all of these legislative issues. All right. So next up, let's talk about the Michigan presidential primary election and the chance that it may be moved up to February, which would make it one of the first in the nation. Where do things stand?
The legislature did pass a bill, and the governor signed it, moving the presidential primary up to February 27th. But here's the kicker: that bill did not get immediate effect. So if what immediate effect means is that a bill cannot take effect until 90 days after final adjournment for the year of the legislature. Well, the legislature typically would not adjourn for the final time of the year until the end of December. Well, if they don't adjourn until the end of September, that bill they passed doesn't take effect until after February 27th. So this has created kind of a conundrum. What do they do about it? The legislature, and it's kind of, let me say, like inside baseball in terms of why it didn't get an immediate effect. It has to do with some political negotiations or a desire among leadership in the legislature not to negotiate. But in any event, the bill didn't get immediate effect. So one thing the legislature could do is they could adjourn early. So if they were to adjourn for the final time of the year and just not come back for the rest of the year, that would be like late October, early November. if they were to just do that and then just kind of take off from legislative session the last 2 months, then that bill would take effect early enough to run a primary in Michigan on February 27th. And while there hasn't been any announcement that that's the case, I've been in and around the system and kind of see how things are set up and lined up and expectations being set for the legislative schedule. It looks to me like they are kind of getting their ducks in a row to adjourn sometime in time for that bill to take effect and move the presidential primary up next year. So that's a little bit of conjecture on my part, or predictive, trying to perhaps predict and read the tea leaves a little bit, but that's what I see happening in this process, that even though the bill didn't get immediate effect, I think it's becoming more and more likely that there will be an early presidential primary in Michigan, because that bill will take effect, because the legislature will adjourn early. And what does that mean for our members? Of course, anybody voting, you'll have an opportunity to vote, at least in the Democratic primary, which may or may not be interesting at this point. The president is running for re-election. Now, the National Republican Party has not approved moving the presidential primary up in Michigan, which means that if the Republican primary is in Michigan at the same time, that a lot of their delegate strength at the national convention gets reduced. I think it gets cut in half, actually. So Republicans will have a tough choice to make here on whether or not they want to go ahead with an early primary, knowing that it violates the national rules and therefore will reduce their delegate strength at the convention where the presidential nominee is picked, or do they just do like a convention? They won't be able to hold an election for a primary. Some states do conventions, political party conventions, in order to pick their primary winners. So that's that will be kind of a conundrum for Republicans if, again, a big if the presidential primary does end up moving earlier in the process. Again, that date is February 27th.
All right. Well, thanks for breaking that down and keeping us up to date on kind of a complicated answer to that question. All right, let's close out today's show with an update on the UAW. Their contract expires in about a week. A strike was authorized last month. What's going to happen? What's changed?
Yeah, so we're in the last week here, and this is it's actually a pretty big deal. It would have a big impact. A strike, about 150,000 UAW members would have a pretty big impact nationally, but also, but of course, especially here in Michigan. The president over Labor Day, when he was asked on Labor Day about this, he expressed confidence that I think that they'll come to an agreement on a contract settlement. And Shawn Fain, the leader of the UAW, was definitely not on the same page, because his response to the president's optimism was that he was shocked that the president was optimistic about a deal being struck. Based on everything that I've seen so far, it doesn't look like the sides are anywhere close together on issues. In fact, the UAW filed unfair labor action complaints against 2 of the 3 automakers, Stellantis and General Motors, saying that they hadn't put forth good faith offers. But I guess you can kind of understand when also at the same time, when the Ford offer that was made was waved over a trash can, calling it trash or junk or something, why they may have been reluctant to feed into that type of reaction. But there was also maybe just a little bit, the door opened just a little bit of a crack that the new leader of the UAW, Mr. Fain, had indicated that there will have to be some concessions made to the demands that they had on the table at the beginning. That's the first time I heard him say anything like that. It looked very rigid before. But looking at the landscape, there's not really a lot of reason to be confident that the contracts will be agreed to or settled before the expiration. It's not to say there's not hope, But outwardly, there's really not a lot that you could point to express any confidence at all that they're going to come to an agreement before a strike.
All right, we'll certainly keep everyone updated on that topic as well. So we are out of our topics for today, but I do want to remind everyone that SBAM is hosting a golf outing next Thursday. This is to benefit the SBAM Foundation. If you're considering, joining us next Thursday, please do register now. We'll be closing registration soon. You can learn more at sbam.org/golf outing. It will be at the Medalist Golf Course in Marshall. It's a beautiful course, and if you're a golfer, please join us. We will see you back here on Monday. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody. See you Monday.